Hey everybody, I want to show you a little bit more about Tinkercad today and go through it in some depth, show you some of the better features, some of the things that you'll need to know to complete an upcoming assignment. So you can see here I have Tinkercad open and I've logged in. You can see that I have 3D designs chosen. So you might remember we did some stuff within circuits, emulating Arduino, etc. But what we're really interested in now is 3D designs. So that's what I have over here. And I'm going to select Create New Design. Now, this brings us to an empty work plane. And you've all been through the tutorial now. You know how to kind of navigate around within Tinkercad. We can kind of spin this around to get a good look at it. Now, the first thing I do when I'm working on a project here, and by the way, if it's not clear, what we're really doing, we're drawing a three-dimensional object here in preparation for making it, for printing it on our 3D printer. And I'm going to show you how to draw one, and then I'm going to get you to draw probably a keychain, and I'll print it out for you, hopefully. Now, the first thing I do when I'm working on a project, I come up here and rename it. So it makes up some kind of a silly nonsense name, but what you're going to want to do is rename this thing, and I'll call mine my keychain. Okay, easy enough. Now, you've been through the tutorial, you've seen how we can use this cube to kind of spin your work plane around and look at it from different angles. Probably you've seen the different shapes that you have over here available to drag and place on your work plane. So we could grab a cone, for example, if we wanted to. We'll just drag this cone over here and drop it. And we can resize it, stretch it out this way or that way, whatever, by grabbing these little white boxes. You can also resize it with precision here instead of just dragging the box. What I like to do a lot of times, if I want to have exactly the dimensions that I want, I will click the box and then I'll come in here and say I want this thing to be exactly some dimensions that I specify. So I'll say I want this thing to be 50 wide, and maybe down here I want it to be symmetrical, so I'm going to say I want it to be 50 long. Okay, and so now if we look at it from the top, we've got a nice symmetrical cone there. Maybe I want it to be a little taller too though. So now I'm looking at it from the front and I want it to stretch on out high. You can see that what we can do is choose this guy. This is the height of it. And we can stretch this out, or of course we can type a particular value that we want. Okay, so that's how you can use the little handles and to specify your dimensions. Now I want to show you some other things here too. When you have an object selected on your work plane, like for example this cone, often it will have different properties over here in the shape box. So for example, this one, it has a property called sides, and what that's saying is how many, I don't know if you can see this well on the video, but it's really saying how many different segments is this thing going to print as we're making the shape. So I'm reducing the number of sides here all the way down to 7, and you can see it's getting a little bit more sharper, looking more like a circus tent or something now. So it's not as smooth. We can change this property, crank it all the way up to a high number, and now it's really, really smooth. It's looking like a nice, smooth cone. So you can kind of fool around with that and see, you know, get it to be something you like. It kind of depends on whatever it is you're trying to accomplish. Sometimes fewer sides might be appropriate. If we go all the way down to 3, now we just have a pyramid. Sometimes more sides might be appropriate. So let's get rid of this thing, and I'm just gonna select it and click delete. Now it's gone. We can do something, let's drop a ball on here now, for example. Let's see what this is gonna do. So we can have a ball. It has a property called steps. And it's similar, except instead of just applying to one dimension of the shape, it's now applying to all 3 dimensions of the shape. We can also look at, besides the basic shapes that you have available over here, there are some cool ones that I think are pretty cool anyway. Over here within the shape generators, you can come in here and choose featured, and now you've got these cool things like a spring or a screw right here. This is like a little propeller that would go on a fidget spinner. This is cool right here. This is what we call a soft box. So it's kind of a box with rounded corners on it instead of sharp, hard corners. They're rounded, kind of easier. And we can do things like, we can modify some of these properties to see how it changes. So you see I made the wall a lot thicker there. Now I'm making it thinner. So if you can see this happening. When I make this wall thick like that, it consumes the whole box. We can modify the outer radius here. This kind of affects how it rounds it.
Move on.
None of these property modifications are essential to what you're trying to accomplish. I'm just showing you how you can select and modify different properties of different objects here. I'm going to look at the bent pipe. Let's see what kind of properties it has. So you can see this bent pipe is cool. You can modify these different properties of it to sort of change the shape here, the way it renders. So we can go from a circle to an octagon, a hexagon. That's all stuff for you to play around with. I'm not going to require any of that in your assignment. I just wanted to point out to you. You should look around at some of these shape generators too. Some of these are, I think, kind of cool. This is a state generator. So here's the state of Mississippi. Boom. Anyway, we're interested in a pretty simple object. So we can go over here to basic shapes, and we can choose. What I'm going to have you do is draw a keychain. And for that keychain, we can choose a couple of different shapes. We could choose a box or a cylinder. You may like a heart. Even a star might be cool. The star is going to have sharp edges, so it might not be the best choice. I'm not telling you can't choose it, but you may not like carrying around that sharp star in your pocket all day. I kind of like the cylinder shape, and so I'm going to drop one of these here, and we can begin to modify it and monkey around with it now. What we have here is a perfect circle we just dropped. You may like a keychain like that, or you may want something more like an oval. So I'm going to stretch it out and make it more kind of an oval. And obviously now, this thing, by the way, all of these numbers, these dimensions are in millimeters. And so this would be 24 millimeters wide, 50 millimeters long, and here we're 20 millimeters tall. So that's 2 centimeters tall. That's probably not the keychain you want. I don't think you want to carry that around in your pocket all the time. And so we're going to shrink that down. I'm going to shrink it down to 5 millimeters. That'll be half a centimeter. Okay. So that's kind of a boring looking keychain. Let's look at some of the properties here. We have a number of sides. So as we shrink the number of sides, it gets kind of more cornery, sharper. The corners get sharper and harder. As we increase the number of sides, it gets smoother. That's what I recommend. I like that nice smooth edge on it, and so I cranked it all the way up to 64. Okay, so we've got this oval down here that's a good start to a keychain, but we don't have anywhere to hook a ring. We need a hole in it. So I'm going to show you this concept of a hole that Tinkercad has. Most of these objects you see over here are solid three-dimensional shapes, and they will print out on the printer similar to how you see them. A couple of these you can see look differently though. These top two, you have a box and a cylinder. These are the absence of material. This is where you want to say, I don't want any material here. Basically, this is how you make a hole in an object. All right. So you've got these two to work with if you wanted a box hole or a cylinder hole. But you can make any of these shapes be a hole. And I'm going to choose a polygon here just to show you how you can do it. So I'm going to drag it over here. And you know, there are a few properties of this shape. How many sides? What's the bevel like, etc. I'm going to change it to, I'm going to crank the number of sides up now. Let's crank it to 8. That gives us an octagon. So that's has a name that we're all familiar with. All right, so we've got this octagon here. And what I want to do now, though, we don't want to print this octagon. What we want is a hole within our keychain. So I'm going to change it to be, right now it's set to solid, I'm going to change it to hole, boom, just like that. So did you see that? Instead of it being, it was a solid, and now I'm changing it to be a hole. That's all we're doing. Now this is too big. We don't want a hole that big in our keychain, so I'm going to shrink it down here. I'm going to grab the little white handle and reduce it to about 5 by 5 would be good. Okay. All right, so that looks pretty good. That's a good start. We need to get it within our keychain though. And it didn't matter what height I set it, as long as it's taller than my keychain. I could have it be that high, this high, this high. The height doesn't really matter because what we're doing is removing material from the keychain. So what I'm going to do now is drag it over here, and I'm going to put it a little bit away from the edge because we don't want our keychain to have a hole really close to the edge where it would be prone to tearing. And place it in there. And I'm going to get it lined up here nicely. The way to get it lined up, we're going to use the alignment tool at the top. I'm going to select the oval, and I'm going to shift click to select the hole. So now I have two shapes selected, and I'm going to get a good look at this from the top, and I'm going to choose the align tool. So now you see it's giving me this kind of a series of dots that I can click on, and depending on where I click, that's going to move that hole to be in the spot I want. Now if I click here, I don't know if you'll be able to see this on the video, but it's wanting to put it right here in the middle when I hover over this black dot right here. That's not where I want it. You don't want a hole right in the middle of your key ring. And if I do it here, that's saying that it's going to place it exactly in the center of our x-axis here. Basically, is what that's telling us, which is what we want. So I'm going to click it here, and you can see we got a little adjustment, put it right in the middle of our x-axis. If I had chosen this one, let me just show you what will happen. Uh-oh, right in the middle. That's not what we want. So now's a good time to point out that if you ever do anything in Tinkercad that it didn't turn out exactly like you wanted, maybe you accidentally clicked on something you didn't mean to, you got an undo button right up here. That's your friend. All right, so I'm going to show you again how to get it nice and lined up. I'm going to select them both by shift clicking. I'm going to choose my alignment tool, get it lined up right there in the X center. Let's get it a little closer to the edge though. Let me try this one more time. Boom. All right. Now, we've got an oval, we've got a hole in it. Come down here to the bottom, you can kind of see that hole. But it's not permanent yet. We haven't stuck it in there. And to do that, you got to do something called merge two shapes. So what we're going to do is select them both again. I click my oval, shift click on the hole. Now I've got them both selected. And up here at the top, you've got this group button, which is precisely what I want to do. And just like that, now we've got a hole in our key ring. Okay, good start. Now, I want to make it a little bit fancier though. I want you to have your own custom keychain. So what we can do is we can use some of this text object to write on it actually. And there are a couple of ways to get our writing on top. One way is we can drag the writing over here, type in what we want, something like that. You can change the font too. There are a few different font choices. That's fine for now. That's too much. I'm going to shrink this down a little bit to something more printable. Okay. And then we can lift this thing off the surface, lift it to a height of exactly 5 millimeters because that's how high we made this thing, how tall we made it, I should say. So now this thing's 5 millimeters. And then we can drag it over here and place it on the top. We'll need to shrink it down some so we can select it like this and shrink it. And shrink it a little bit more. Uh-oh. I grabbed the wrong thing. Let's undo. All right, so now I want to select my writing again. Shrink it down like that. And kind of orient it there. That's one way to do it. That's a little bit too much trouble. And so instead I'm going to show you this concept of a work plane. So, and you'll probably see this in the tutorials, but a work plane is basically just a way of putting a little work area on top of another object so that we can drop things on it. So I'm going to drag a work plane on top of our oval here. And now I'm going to pull the text over and boom, just like that, it's sitting on top of my keychain object. And so I'll type my name in here. You type your name, whatever it is. All right, and we're going to shrink it down to fit. You can grab this corner here and shrink it like this. The problem with that, though, is it doesn't maintain the proper ratio. See how it's easy to distort it like that? And so that's not really what we're after. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to undo all of that I just did. If you shift and grab this corner, so hold down the shift button and click this corner. Now whenever you drag it, it maintains the correct proportion. Okay, so now the height and width stay proportionate. And I can drag it on here and put it right in the nice spot there. All right, so now that thing is sitting right on top of my keychain. I'm done with the work plane, so the way to get rid of the work plane now is to reach up here, grab another work plane, drag it down here, and turn it loose, and now that made the first one go away. That's kind of a silly way of removing your work plane, but it is what it is. But now I'm looking at this writing, and that's too tall. I don't want that writing sticking out, sticking a hole in my pocket all the time. So I'm going to shrink that down now to about 3 millimeters. Is about how much we can get away with. If you get any less than 3 millimeters, it starts to not print very sharp. It's hard to read it. So, did you see what I did there? I changed the height of the writing. Right here, you can make it tall, but you don't want it tall like that sticking in your pocket all the time. So make it 3 millimeters, and we can even align it like we did earlier with the hole. Let's align our writing with the oval. I've selected them both using shift click, and I'm going to choose align, and this middle one right here, boom, now it's got it nice and lined up. Now one other thing we need to do is group these objects the same way earlier we grouped our oval and our hole. We need to group our writing and our oval. So I shift click to select them both again, and I reach up here to group. All right, and just like that, now we've got one 3D object consisting of some writing, a shape, and a hole. We can kind of rotate it around here. We can look at it from the bottom, from the side, etc. You may be wondering about the color. This is red just because that's what Tinkercad is showing it right now. It's showing it as red. That is not necessarily how it will print on our printer. How it comes off the printer depends on what color material I use. You've seen that string that we use to print on the printer. It looks like weed eater string. Well, I've got some different colors of that. And this object here happens to be red, but if I used a yellow string, then it would print out as yellow. Now, one other thing I'll show you. If you do happen to group something and then later you change your mind and you don't like it, the ungroup button is up here. So I've got our object selected, and I can come up here and say ungroup, and just like that, now it's back to 2 distinct objects. And I can even do it again. I've got the oval again here now, and if I say ungroup again, now our hole is back to being its own distinct object. So ungroup undoes the group operation. But I didn't want to do that. I'm just showing you how. So I'm going to say undo, undo again, and boom. We're back just like we want to be. So that's more about Tinkercad, how to use it in depth. Stay tuned to Google Classroom. I will give you a formal assignment with some formal parameters for how I want you to draw your keychain. All right, thanks everybody.